Divine Grace, through the HG Carucandra Swami Prabhupada, Paramahamsa, Parivrtyacharya Asatara Sata Sri Srimati Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada.
Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai.
Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Mayapur Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Gangamayi Yamunamayi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Gaura Prem. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today we continue our study of Srimad Bhagavatam. We are in the second canto, the 9th chapter. Today's verse is 35. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Yata Mahanti Bhutani Bhuteshu Chavasich Cheshvanu Pravishtanya Pravishtani Tatateshu Nateshvaham. Yata Mahanti Bhutani Bhuteshu Chavasich Cheshvanu Pravishtanya Pravishtani Tatateshu Nateshvaham. Yata Mahanti Bhutani Bhuteshu Chavacheshvanu Pravishtanya Pravishtani Tatateshu Nateshvaham. Please chant.
Hare Krishna. Yatha mahanti bhutani bhuteshu cha chavachesh va anu pravishtani apravishtani tatha teshu na cha teshvaham.
Hare Krishna. Yata Mahanti Bhutani Bhutesu Java Ches Anu Pravistani Apravistani Tatati Sunates Aham.
यथा महन्ति भूतानि भूतेषु च वत्सेष्वनु प्रविश्यन्ति प्रविष्टानि तथा तेष्वनुतेष्वहम्.
Hare Krishna. Yatha mahanti bhutani bhuteshu javacheshu anu pravishtanya apravishtani tatha teshu nateshaham.
Yatha mahanti bhutani bhuteshu chashvacheshvanu pravishtani apravishtani tatha teshu nateshvaham.
Hare Krishna. Yatha mahanti bhutani bhuteshu chavacheshanu pravishtani apravishtani tatha teshu natesh aham. Hare Krishna.
Anyone else? Yata, just as Mahanti, the universal, Bhutani, elements, Bhuteshu Uchcha Avacheshu, in the minute and gigantic. Anu, after. Pravishtani, entered. Apravishtani, not entered. Tata, so. Teshu, in them. Na, not. Teshu, in them. Aham, myself. Translation. This is Lord Vishnu speaking to Brahma. This is the third of the famous Chatur Shloki Bhagavatam. O Brahma, please know that the universal elements enter into the cosmos and at the same time do not enter into the cosmos. Similarly, I myself also exist within everything created, and at the same time, I am outside of everything. Purport by Charanarvinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The great elements of material creation, namely earth, water, fire, air, and ether, all enter into the body of all manifested entities. The seas, mountains, aquatics, plants, reptiles, birds, beasts, human beings, demigods, and everyone materially manifested. And at the same time, such elements are differently situated. In the developed stage of consciousness, the human being can study both physiological and physical science, but the basic principles of such sciences are nothing but the material elements and nothing more. The body of the human being and the body of the mountain, as also the bodies of the demigods, including Brahma, are all of the same ingredient, earth, water, and so forth. And at the same time, the elements are beyond the body. The elements were created first, and therefore they entered into the bodily construction later. But in both circumstances, they entered the cosmos and also did not enter. Similarly, the Supreme Lord, by his different energies, namely the internal and external, is within everything in the manifested cosmos, and at the same time, he is outside of everything, situated in the kingdom of God, Vaikuntha Loka, as described before. This is very nicely stated in the Brahma Samhita, chapter 5, verse 37, as follows. Ananda Chinmaya Rasa Pratibhavitabhis Abhirya Eva Nijarupataya Kalabhi Goloka Eva Nivasatyakilatma Bhuto Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Pajami. I worship the personality of Godhead Govinda, who by expansion of his internal potency of transcendental existence, knowledge, and bliss, enjoys in his own and expanded forms. Simultaneously, he enters into every atom of the creation. End quote. This expansion of his plenary parts is also more definitely explained in the same Brahma Samhita, text 35, as follows. Eko Yashao Rachayitum Jagad Andakotim Yachaktir Asti Jagad Andachaya Yad Anda Rashta Paramanu Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. I worship the personality of Godhead Govinda, who, by expansion of his internal potency of transcendental existence, knowledge, and bliss, enjoys in his own and I read the other one again. Sorry. I worship the personality of Godhead Govinda, who, by one of his plenary portions, enters into the existence of every universe and every particle of the atoms, and thus unlimitedly manifests his infinite energy all over the material creation. The impersonalists can imagine or even perceive that the Supreme Brahman is thus all-pervading, and therefore they conclude that there is no possibility of his personal form. Herein lies the mystery of his transcendental knowledge. This mystery is transcendental love of Godhead, and one who is surcharged with such transcendental love of Godhead can, without difficulty, see the personality of Godhead in every atom and every movable or immovable object. At the same time, he can see the personality of Godhead in his own abode, Goloka, enjoying eternal pastimes with his eternal associates, who are all also expansions of his transcendental existence. This vision is the real mystery of spiritual knowledge, as stated by the Lord in the beginning. Sara hasyam tad angam cha. This mystery is the most confidential part of the knowledge of the Supreme, and it is impossible for the mental speculators to discover by dint of intellectual gymnastics. The mystery can be revealed through the process recommended by Brahmaji in his Brahma Samhita, chapter 5, text 38, as follows. Premanjana charita bhakti vilochanena
Anena
anta sadaiva hridayeshu
Yeshave
vayopayanti yam tam machindaramachintya gunaswarupam govindam adi purusham tamaham bhajami. I worship the original personality of Godhead Govinda, whom the pure devotees, their eyes smeared with the ointment of love of Godhead, always observe within their hearts. This Govinda, the original personality of Godhead, is Shama Sundara, with all transcendental qualities. Therefore, although he is present in every atom, the Supreme Personality of Godhead may not be visible to the dry speculators. Still, the mystery is unfolded before the eyes of the pure devotees, because their eyes are anointed with love of Godhead. And this love of Godhead can be attained only by the practice of transcendental loving service of the Lord and nothing else. The vision of the devotees is not ordinary. It is purified by the process of devotional service. In other words, as the universal elements are both within and without, similarly, the Lord's name, form, quality, pastimes, entourage, and so on, as they are described in the revealed scriptures, or as performed in the Vaikuntha Lokas, far, far beyond material cosmic manifestation, are factually being televised in the heart of the devotee. The man with a poor fund of knowledge cannot understand, although by material science one can see things far away by means of television. Factually, the spiritually developed person is able to have the television of the kingdom of God always reflected within his heart. That is the mystery of the knowledge of the personality of Godhead. The Lord can award anyone and everyone liberation, mukti, from the bondage of material existence. Yet he rarely awards the privilege of love of Godhead, as confirmed by Narada. Muktim dadati karhachit sma na bhakti yogam. This transcendental devotional service of the Lord is so wonderful that the occupation keeps the deserving devotee always wrapped in psychological activities without deviation from the absolute touch. Thus, love of Godhead, developed in the heart of the devotee, is a great mystery. Brahmaji previously told Nara that the desires of Brahmaji are never unfulfilled because he is always absorbed in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Nor has he any desire in his heart save and except the transcendental service of the Lord. That is the beauty and mystery of the process of bhakti yoga. As the Lord's desire is infallible because he is achyuta, similarly, the desires of the devotees in the transcendental service of the Lord are also achyuta, infallible. This is very difficult, however, for the layman to understand without knowledge of the mystery of devotional service, as it is very difficult to know the potency of touchstone. As touchstone is rarely found, a pure devotee of the Lord is also rarely to be seen, even amongst millions of liberated souls. Kotishvapi Mahamune. Out of all kinds of perfections attained by the process of knowledge, yoga perfection in devotional service is the highest of all and the most mysterious also. Even more mysterious than the 8 kinds of mystic perfection attained by the process of yogic performances. In the Bhagavad Gita 1864, the Lord therefore advised Arjuna about this bhakti yoga. Sarvagu yatamam bhuya shrinu me paramam vachaha. Just hear from me again about the most confidential part of the instructions in Bhagavad Gita, unquote. This same was confirmed by Brahmaji to Narad in the following words. Idam Bhagavatam nama yanme bhagavatoditam sangraho yam vibhutinam tvam etat vipulikaru. Brahmaji said to Narad, whatever I have spoken to you about the Bhagavatam was explained to me by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and I am advising you to expand these topics nicely so that people may easily understand the mysterious bhakti yoga by transcendental loving service to the Lord, end quote. It is to be noted here that the mystery of bhakti yoga was disclosed to Brahmaji by the Lord himself. Brahmaji explained the same mystery to Narad. Narad explained it to Vyas. Vyas explained it to Shukadev Goswami. And that same knowledge is coming down in the unalloyed chain of disciplic succession. If one is fortunate enough to have received the knowledge in the transcendental disciplic succession, surely he will have the chance to understand the mystery of the Lord and that of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the sound incarnation of the Lord. Okay, the verse one more time. O Brahma, please know that the universal elements enter into the cosmos and at the same time do not enter into the cosmos. Similarly, I myself also exist within everything created, and at the same time, I am outside of everything. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitanamane Namaste Saraswate Deva Gauravana Vacharya Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashtyapti Deshatani Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Undalitam Hina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So this verse, as we mentioned before, this is the 3rd verse of the famous Chatur Shloki of Srimad Bhagavatam. This verse also appears in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita twice, actually, in Adi Leela, chapter 1, text 55, and then again in Madhya Leela, chapter 25, text 126. These verses, these 4 verses, can be spoken on, and I'm not exaggerating here, for lifetimes, actual lifetimes, right? Sometimes we say that a verse can be spoken on for months or even years, and it's true, we can. But these 4 verses are actually the summary of the whole Srimad Bhagavatam. The whole Srimad Bhagavatam was expanded from these 4 instructions that were given by Sri Vishnu to Brahmaji. So quite literally, we just on this particular format, this Zoom format that we're on here, have been speaking on these verses for over 4 years. And it started way before that, and so it continues to go on. Philadelphia actually has been having regular Srimad Bhagavatam classes for over 50 years. And each of those classes is an expansion of these 4 verses. So it's almost insane to try to speak on this verse in such a small amount of time. But luckily, we just keep doing this, right? We keep doing this, whether it's these actual verses or expansions of these verses. We keep speaking on them until we understand the essence. And speaking of the essence, I want to read an excerpt from Madhya Leela. This is Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Leela, chapter 25, verses 102 to 104. It's talking about these very verses. Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj says, the essence of Srimad Bhagavatam, and then in a subsection to what the essence of Srimad Bhagavatam is, he says, our relationship with the Supreme Lord, our activities in that connection, and the goal of life. So the essence of Srimad Bhagavatam, which are these three things, relationship with the Supreme Lord, our activities in that connection, and the goal of life. Do these three things sound familiar to anyone? Do we have terms for these three things? Anyone want to share that with us? Relationship with the Supreme Lord, the activities in that connection, and the goal of life.
Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana.
Exactly. And that's what it says actually in the Bengali. Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj says that. So the essence of Srimad Bhagavatam, which is Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana, the relationship with the Supreme Lord, our activities in that connection to that relationship, and the ultimate goal of life, is manifest in the 4 verses of Srimad Bhagavatam known as the Chatur Shloki. Everything is explained in those verses. Lord Krishna says, I am the center of all relationships. Knowledge of me and the practical application of that knowledge is actual knowledge. So within Sambandha Gyan, he's actually saying that knowing me and the relationship and actually practically applying that, that's all considered Sambandha Gyan, right? What some might say the practical application part is more Abhideya, but then he clarifies. Approaching me for devotional service is called Abhideya. So having the knowledge, then having the realized knowledge, and then using that realized knowledge to actually engage in devotional service, that's the Abhideya. Before that, that's Sambandha Gyan. Continuing, by rendering devotional service, one gradually rises to the platform of love of Godhead. So that's the Prayojana. That is the chief goal of life. On the platform of love of Godhead, one is eternally engaged in the service of the Lord. In this section of Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's amazing. It expands on these 4 verses in a very sweet way. Maybe some, unfortunately, I didn't hear the other 2 classes for the other 2 verses, but maybe some of the devotees giving class also delved into that. But what I want to do before we start is I want to read the purport from Adi Leela 155. It's significantly shorter than today's purport. It's the same verse. And it's quite sweet. So Srimad Bhagavatam gives us generally, it's the postgraduate study. So we've understood that we need to surrender to Krishna. We get that from Bhagavad Gita. Now Srimad Bhagavatam teaches us what that means. What does it actually mean to surrender to Krishna? Who is Krishna? And when we actually know who Krishna is, as the mundane song goes, to know him is to love him. But it's absolutely true in the case of Krishna. Just to understand Krishna's personality, the way he interacts with his devotees, the way he's willing to go out of his way just to make his devotees happy, one automatically falls in love with him. One actually understands who he is. And then the Chaitanya Charitamrita, so the Srimad Bhagavatam is the postgraduate study, so it'll explain all these things. Then the Chaitanya Charitamrita is just, there's also tattva there, but there's so much rasa there as well. And so we get the same information, but in a much sweeter way. And so I want to read just the purport. This is Adi 155. Again, it's the same verses today. And the purport that Srila Prabhupada wrote goes like this. The gross material elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, combine with the subtle material elements, mind, intelligence, and false ego, to construct the bodies of this material world, and yet they are beyond these bodies as well. Any material construction is nothing but an amalgamation or combination of material elements in varied proportions. These elements exist both within and beyond the body. For example, although the sky exists in space, it also enters within the body. Similarly, the Supreme Lord, who is the cause of the material energy, lives within the material world as well as beyond it. Without his presence within the material world, the cosmic body could not develop, just as without the presence of the spirit within the physical body, the body could not develop. The entire material manifestation develops and exists because the Supreme Personality of Godhead enters it as Paramatma, or Supersoul. The personality of Godhead, in his all-pervading feature of Paramatma, enters every entity, from the biggest to the most minute. His existence can be realized by one who has the single qualification of submissiveness, and who thereby becomes a surrendered soul. The development of submissiveness is the cause of proportionate spiritual realization, by which one can ultimately meet the Supreme Lord in person as a man meets another man face to face. That last part I'm going to read again because it's so far out. So his existence, the Lord's existence, can be realized by one who has the single qualification of submissiveness, and who thereby becomes a surrendered soul. So we were talking about penance and submissiveness before. That's what qualified Lord Brahma to hear from Lord Vishnu. Again, Prabhupada continues. The development of submissiveness is the cause of proportionate spiritual realization. It doesn't mean that if you become a little submissive, you get complete spiritual realization. It says proportionate. So you surrender a little, you get a little realization. As they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. So depending on how submissive we are to the spiritual master, to the Shastra, to the process, Krishna consciousness, to that degree, spiritual realization will be revealed to us, by which one can ultimately meet the Supreme Lord in person. So the result of this spiritual realization, which is proportionate to our submissiveness, if we're completely submissive, we're completely spiritually realized, and we actually meet the Lord face to face, just as any man meets another man. Srila Prabhupada continues his purport. Because of his development of transcendental attachment for the Supreme Lord, a surrendered soul feels the presence of his beloved everywhere. This is the transcendental television that Srila Prabhupada was talking about in his purport to today's verse. Continuing, and all his senses are engaged in the loving service of the Lord. His eyes are engaged in seeing the beautiful couple, Sri Radha and Krishna, sitting on a decorated throne beneath a desire tree in the transcendental land of Vrindavan. His nose is engaged in smelling the spiritual aroma of the lotus feet of the Lord. Similarly, his ears are engaged in hearing messages from Vaikuntha, and his hands embrace the lotus feet of the Lord and his associates. Thus, the Lord is manifested to a pure devotee from within and without. This is one of the mysteries of the devotional relationship, in which a devotee and the Lord are bound by a tie of spontaneous love. To achieve this love should be the goal of life for every living being. So that's the end of that purport in Chaitanya Charitamrita for this same verse. So we see in the Srimad Bhagavatam, we get it's a very complete purport of the idea of how we are to understand this. And in the Chaitanya Charitamrita purport, it's a simplified version of that. So all of that philosophy is still there, but then it simplifies it, and it gives us this understanding that if we want to actually meet the Lord face to face, right? If that's what we want, if that's our goal, right? Prayojana. We have to know what our relationship is. We have to understand what is the nature of the material world, what is our nature as living entities, what is the relationship between them. And then understanding that, we have to act accordingly, engage in the process of bhakti, and then we can see the Lord face to face. And as it says, the devotee and the Lord are bound by a tie of spontaneous love, right? And we read about this in many other places, this bond between the Supreme Lord and his pure devotees, how Krishna says that he's conquered and overwhelmed by pure love and devotion. And this is the sweetness. This is what every verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam is getting us to understand this point, so that we can actually relish in this relationship. That's the whole purpose of Srimad Bhagavatam, right? So much is there, but everything that's there is directing us to understand, apply ourselves, and actually relish in the sweet, loving pastimes of Krishna eternally. So, what I want to say about these verses is, so first off, let me see what time it is. We have a little bit of time. I have so much more to say, but we'll try to get through this. So first off, the basis of our philosophy is that the spiritual master, who we're meant to be submissive to, always teaches us through examples that are given in Shastra, through explaining to us what Krishna is saying in Shastra, and by his own example, teaching us that Krishna is everything, right? Nothing exists outside of Krishna. So he's in everything. And we are to engage in his service in all circumstances. There shouldn't be one moment in our lives that we're not seeing Krishna as the center, and all of our activities are focused around that relationship. So this is the essence of all scripture. So for example, we have Bhagavad Gita 6:30. Krishna says, "For one who sees me everywhere and sees everything to me, everything in me, to him I am never lost, nor is he ever lost to me." And then, of course, we have the first verse of the Chatur Shloki of both Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. They're essentially saying the same thing. So the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, Chatur Shloki, we heard a couple days ago. And then the one in Bhagavad Gita is, "I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts." So we have to understand that everything comes from Krishna. And if we do understand that and we act accordingly, we will worship Krishna with all our hearts. All of our thoughts, our words, our actions will be engaged in Krishna's service. We understand this properly. So understanding that there is nothing but Krishna is essential. Even we, living entities, we're part and parcel of him. We do have eternal individuality, but we are infinitesimal parts of the infinite whole. So we have to understand what that relationship. To understand that relationship, that's knowledge, as it's said in the Chaitanya Charitamrita verses. That's sambandha. To act strictly according to that knowledge is the process, right? To engage in bhakti, that's the abhideya. And then that, if we do that properly with sincerity, submissiveness, then everything will be revealed, and we will reach our ultimate goal of reawakening our eternal pastimes with Sri Hari. That's the prayojana. So today's verse, at least half of the verse, most of us should have been very familiar with the concept that although Krishna seems to enter this material world, he's also aloof from it. He's not affected by the modes of material nature. We hear that in so many different places throughout Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita. So this one's not new. We also know that the jivas, the living entities, also don't belong. They're tatashta, marginal. They don't belong in the external energy. But sometimes we come here because we're rebellious. We want to know what it would be like to be independent, separate from Krishna. And so that's why this external nature exists. So we know also, just like Krishna, he enters here, but at the same time, he's not affected. The jivas, we enter here and we are affected, but we don't belong here, right? We belong in the spiritual world. So that's also given. We understand that from Bhagavad Gita, from Srimad Bhagavatam again. But today's verse mentions that even these universal elements, right? Earth, water, fire, air, ether, and then as the purport of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita pointed out, also mind, intelligence, and false ego. Although these are entering into the cosmos, they're also not entering the cosmos in a similar way that the Lord simultaneously enters but does not enter. And although in one sense this sounds a bit confusing and maybe even contradictory, it actually makes a whole lot of sense if you delve into it. So everything is Brahman, right? We know this. Nothing exists that is separate from Krishna, right? And Krishna, as we know from Brahma Samhita and so many other places, Krishna, his form is Satchit Ananda, right? Eternal, fully cognizant, and in a constant state of ever increasing bliss. So, since his form, which is in this Satchit Ananda, is everything, even the external energy is part of his form, then that seems to be contradictory, because there's this material world which is temporary, right? It's not eternal. In one sense it is, but it goes through these temporary cycles. We can't stay here. It's certainly not full of bliss. We're suffering all the time. And it's certainly not full of knowledge. There's limited knowledge here in this material world, right? So we can see why one might be confused by this. And there's a philosophy actually called deism, and they try to resolve this apparent contradiction of, you know, God and the material world, and how the two can exist simultaneously and be the same. How can the material world actually be part of God? So the deists actually, they say that although God created the material world, he cut himself off from it. So he doesn't have anything to do with it aside from creating it, right? And so they sort of try to separate God from the material world, because otherwise we come up with these things like, well, there's so many bad things that are happening in the material world, and so if God is great and he's all powerful and he's all merciful, all kind, then there wouldn't be any suffering ever, right? This argument comes up, and this is why the deists come up with this the theoretical solution is that God created the material world, but he's separate from it. But there's a problem with that, because then you can't say that God is everything, right? You can only say that God is most things, and that he's limited, because his power doesn't extend fully to the material world if you adapt that philosophy. And we don't have any real relationship or connection from the material world. If it's separate from him, the material world's separate from him, then we don't really have that connection. So we don't really know how we can solve our predicament, right? But thankfully, Sri Krishna and his representatives in the chain of disciplic succession have explained all of this properly, so that we don't have to be confused. We don't have to think, wait, that doesn't make any sense. How could everything, including this material world, be a part of Krishna, when Krishna's form we know is Satchidananda, but the material world, it's not. So how can this possibly be one of, you know, his energy? Is it separated like that? But no, everything is explained here. So of course this material world is made up of only him, because obviously he is everything. Nothing exists outside of him, right? But when we are not seeing things clearly due to our polluted consciousness, we are in illusion. And that illusion that we are identifying with, and as such we're experiencing, that's the reason why we experience this place as temporary and full of suffering and full of ignorance. Actually, the real thing, as was explained in yesterday's purport, Brahman is Satchit Ananda. Just like sometimes a man will see a rope and it'll look like it's a snake. They'll become very frightened. The rope is real, but it's not a snake. The perception that rope is a snake is an illusion. So the rope is real. It's real. The situation's real. The person's real, but the perception is not real. It's an illusion, right? And so similarly, this material world, as we are perceiving it through our polluted consciousness, is an illusion, right? Everything exists in its proper state, its substantial state, its substance. But what we're dealing with is a shadow, because we are looking at things through our polluted consciousness, through our false ego, instead of looking things through our actual ego of I am a servant of Krishna, everything is part of him. And that's how the consciousness is, the real ego in the spiritual world. Instead of seeing things like that, we think I am separate from Krishna. I am an individual controller and enjoyer. And because we have that misconception, that polluted consciousness, we perceive this these things in the material world as temporary and miserable and full of ignorance, right? But that's our problem. That's our illusion. That's not what actually is happening. What's actually happening is that Krishna's energy is perfect, but we're perceiving it in the wrong way. So you don't have to take my word for this. I'm going to give you some quotes from Srila Prabhupada who will explain this very thing. The first one I'll read from is from a purport of Canto 1, Chapter 3, Text 29, wherein Srila Prabhupada writes, "It is a fact that the material world is a great illusion because everything appears to be a tangible reality, but at the next moment evaporates like a dashing foam of the sea or a cloud in the sky." Right? So the material world is an illusion in that sense. Of course, it's real in another sense. It's illusion in the sense that we're experiencing it in this temporary way because we're trying to see it as separate from Krishna. Right? This next quote is from the second canto, second chapter, verse 6 purport, wherein Srila Prabhupada writes, "As we have discussed many times before, this material world is itself an illusion, like a mirage in the desert. In the desert, there is an illusion of water, and the foolish animals become entrapped by such an illusion and run after water in the desert, although there is no water at all. But because there is no water in the desert, one does not conclude that there is no water at all. The intelligent person knows well that there is certainly water in the seas and oceans, but such vast reservoirs of water are far, far away from the desert. One should therefore search for water in the vicinity of the seas and oceans and not in the desert. Every one of us is searching after real happiness in life, namely eternal life, eternal or unlimited knowledge, and unending blissful life. But foolish people who have no knowledge of the substance search after the reality of life in the illusion." Again, so we're talking about the substance that exists in the spiritual, and then the shadow that we're experiencing here due to our illusion of seeing things separately from Krishna. So I have a personal example of this. I don't know if everyone has had this experience, but when I was young, my family used to take road trips. And a couple of the road trips we took were to the West Coast because I had two brothers who lived in Arizona, and so sometimes we would pick them up, and for the summer they would spend time with us in Pennsylvania. And so we made this trip a couple times. And of course, when you're driving from the East Coast to the West Coast, you drive through some deserts, right? And so once when I was maybe 7, 8 years old, we're driving, it's like it was a three or 4 day, actually a 4-day drive for us because we stopped frequently, 3 kids on the way there, 5 kids on the way back. You don't want to, you need your breaks. The parents need their breaks. So we're on this long trip and we're in the desert and there's really nothing even to look at because it's just flats and there's no vegetation and there's nothing around. And so I'm sitting in the back seat and I see what appears to be a huge lake coming up on the right-hand side. And to me, I'm thinking, let's stop there at that lake and just swim for a little while. So I said to my mom, "Look, there's a lake up there. Can we stop there when we get there?" She said, "That's not a lake." I said, "No, it's absolutely a lake. I see it. I see the water moving. It's shimmering. It's 100% a lake. I see it." She's like, "No, that's not a lake. That's a mirage. You're just seeing things." And I was like, no, that is obviously a lake. And she's like, "Look, I'm looking at the map right here. Here's the road that we're on. Here's the town we're near. There's no lake." And so I bet her $100 that I didn't have that was actually a lake. I was convinced that's a lake. And sure enough, it was no lake. There was no lake there. It was a mirage. When the sun hits the desert, it sort of shimmers and it looks like there's water. And we can convince ourselves that, 100%, I am certain that is water. It looks exactly like it. So I don't know if everybody's had this experience, but this is a common thing. So even though some of you may not have had that particular experience, we all have had that experience in another way, where we think that there is pleasure in this material world. We think that this world is the all in all. We don't think that there's a need to go anywhere else, right? Just like these animals in the desert that are dying because they can't find, they think they see water, but they can't actually get to it. We are here in this material world. And the same thing is happening. So in yesterday's purport, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it was talking about the rope. I mentioned that in the snake. The rope actually exists, but the perception of it, that's called Maya. Right? So we have to understand that the material world, it's real in the sense that it exists, but it is illusory in the sense of how we perceive it. Just like the rope exists, but the perception that it is a snake, that's an illusion. So ours is a problem of perception. And our perception can only be cleared up by engaging in bhakti and hearing from authorized representatives of Krishna. So here's another quote. This one's from the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 30, verse 5. At the beginning of this quote, Srila Prabhupada is going to be paraphrasing a verse. If anyone recognizes it, please let me know. So Srila Prabhupada said, Lord Krishna is personally canvassing, give up everything in this material world. Come to me. I shall give you all protection. What verse is that?
Sarvadharma.
Sarvadharman Prityaja. Thank you. But then Srila Prabhupada continues, but we are not agreeable. We think we are quite all right. Why should we surrender unto Krishna and go back to his kingdom? That is called illusion or Maya. Everyone is satisfied with his standard of living, however abominable it may be. And that's true. We're here in this material world. We know, at least in theory, that we should surrender to Krishna. But we're quite comfortable following our patterns that aren't actually engaging in the process of bhakti, just the ones that we're conditioned to do. We're quite comfortable doing those, thinking that, okay, eventually, I'm going to do that. I value it. I understand it's important. I understand that it's, even the most important thing. But right now, I have things to do, right? So I'll do that at some point. Or even more dangerous, we think we're doing it, but we're not, because we don't understand the actual process. We have this incomplete idea of what the process of bhakti is sometimes, and we think we're engaging, but we're not actually seeing Krishna as the center. So it's not actually proper bhakti, right? So many quotes that I want to read. They're all kind of quite similar. All right, I'll read this one more, and then we'll kind of try to wrap it up. So this one's from Adi Leela, first chapter, 54th verse in the purport. Srila Prabhupada writes, that which is relative, temporary, and far away from the absolute truth is called Maya, or ignorance, right? Because it doesn't exist. There's no such thing as temporary or relative or far away from the absolute truth, because the absolute truth is everything. So how could something be far away? So anytime we perceive anything that's relative, temporary, or far away from the absolute truth, that is called Maya, or ignorance. This illusion is exhibited in two ways, as explained in Bhagavad Gita. The inferior illusion is inert matter, and the superior illusion is the living entity. The living entities are called illusory in this context only because they are implicated in the illusory structures and activities of the material world. That's the only reason why they're called illusory, because they are implicated in the illusory structures and activities of the material world. Srila Prabhupada continues, actually, the living entities are not illusory, for they are parts of the superior energy of the Supreme Lord and do not have to be covered by Maya if they do not want to be so. The actions of the living entities in the spiritual kingdom are not illusory. They are the actual eternal activities of liberated souls. So we see that this perception of this material world, that's what the illusion is. But everything that's coming from Krishna is properly engaged, right? Yeah, okay. So let's wrap this up here, because we're running out of time. So the conclusion, and again, I apologize for going over this subject matter. It's, like I said, talk about it for lifetimes. So the conclusion, though, is this material world as we perceive it is an illusion. If we want to experience the reality of the situation, we must approach a bona fide spiritual master and take their instructions very seriously to learn how to see things as they are, parts of Krishna, to use everything accordingly, right? So just like the purports of today said that one who is actually engaged in Krishna service 100% is actually seeing the activities that are going on in Vaikuntha, right? They're being broadcast to the devotee. One is seeing Krishna everywhere in this world. Here, this material world, it's a reflection of the real thing. So if we redirect our consciousness properly, we're no longer dealing with the reflection. We're dealing with the substance, right? So the pure devotee, even if superficially may be in this material world, factually, they're only seeing Krishna everywhere. They're only serving Krishna with every activity, right? No part of Krishna is temporary, but we, through our polluted consciousness, perceive things as separate from him, and therefore we're under the illusion that things are temporary. Everything is Brahman, everything is eternal. Our perception is the problem. It's the only problem, and it's in our best interest to solve it. And I will I'll finish this class just with one more quote. There are a lot of quotes today. This one is from the 9th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 13th chapter, verse 27 purport, where Srila Prabhupada writes, in the world of duality, that is to say in the material world, so-called goodness and badness are both the same. Therefore, in this world, to distinguish between good and bad, happiness and distress is meaningless because they are both mental concoctions, madhodharma. Because everything here is miserable and troublesome, to create an artificial situation and pretend it to be full of happiness is simply illusion. So this idea that we sometimes have that, okay, not everything in this material world is bad. There are some aspects that are nice. That's all actually an illusion. Nothing in this material world is good, right? So to see things like that, it's meaningless because it's a mental concoction. We have to understand reality through Shastra. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. That's what the Srimad Bhagavatam is here to help us understand. What is the difference between reality and illusion? And when we can understand what is truly reality, we understand who we are, what our relationship is to the Supreme, we act accordingly, engage in the process of bhakti, then we will meet the Supreme Lord face to face. Anyway, that's this verse in a very big nutshell. Are there any questions or comments or anything else that anyone wants to say on this verse? I see that.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yes. Hare
Uh,
Krishna.
When you were asking about the mirage experience that you had, not necessarily the mirage, but so many times we think that this is the real world. And I think it is heard most of the times when we are trying to decide where our charity should go. You give it to hospitals or to education or things like that. And that's the one thing I keep hearing is, but look at all the suffering that's going on. How can you not help for this cause?
Yeah.
And when you tell them this is why, this is what our acharyas have said, so this is why, it still does not it still does not affect them in that way. They're still very focused on what they are seeing with these eyes in front of them.
Yes.
And like you were saying, I think it is only through submission, through surrender. Again, I'm not fully surrendered, so I'm not going to say that I fully understand, but whatever extent we surrender, to that extent I have understood that there is more, that there is beyond what I can see. And again, like you were saying, the 4 slokas were expanded into the entire Bhagavatam. We have to keep hearing it again and again and again, so that slowly it will sink in. And I think what you said today is, I'm just realizing how we are actually, that's exactly what is going on. This is how the Lord saw it would happen. This is how Brahmaji thought it would happen. This is how Narada said it would happen. People will be mandamatis. They will need to be told. And so hopefully we will keep on hearing and we will get there someday. Just a thought.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that thought. Anyone else? Looks like Anna G, you're unmuted. Did you want to say something? Who else?
Thank you very much, Prabhu. This is really a lot of things to know from these Chatuslokas. And that's why, like, Chatuslokas are, you put a big pile of food, eat everything at one time. No, I cannot eat. If you give me every day a little bit, then I can eat, and at least I can understand. I can eat, and then I know what I'm eating.
Wow.
I think that's what I felt, Prabhu. These Chatuslokas are strong meaning in this. But Bhagavatam, like you said, it's spread into Bhagavatam. So that I have a capacity and understanding or anything. So it's Bhagavatam is, at least slowly I am getting into that.
Nice.
Of course, I read Brahma Samhita every day. So at least Brahma is telling that whatever little in 2 lines of that the meaning. At least that way I want to connect with this and then see if I can get it.
One more thing I wanted to read. So Madhya Lila chapter 25, there's a whole section that goes through these verses, and it's so sweet. I'm hoping that the other devotees went through these sections. Otherwise, you can go through. But what it says after it quotes today's verse, the next verse is, a highly elevated devotee can bind me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in his heart by love. Wherever he looks, he sees me and nothing else. So, and this is true. This is absolutely true.
Yeah.
So when we can actually experience Krishna everywhere, which isn't, in one sense, it's not difficult because there's nothing but Krishna. He makes it, in other words, he makes it easy. But since we're very stubborn with our false ego, and we're holding on to this concept of no, I think that I can actually exist independently, and I can control, and I can enjoy separately.
No,
To that extent, but as soon as we're submissive, to whatever degree we're submissive, the absolute truth will be revealed to us. And when we're completely submissive, we get to meet the Lord face to face. And let's see, how did it go again? We actually, the pure devotee then binds Krishna in his heart by love. It's so far out that this happens, because we tend to think, when we hear the philosophy, when we first hear the philosophy that you have to be submissive and you gotta, render service, and that we're infinitesimally small, right? And where it's a life of servitude. We don't think that sounds very nice, because in the material world that wouldn't be nice. We're indentured servants for eternity. But then we find out that when we actually surrender fully to Krishna, he also surrenders fully to us. And our desires, not me, but the pure devotee's desires, become more important than Krishna's own desires. It's so far out, but that's actually how it works, right? And then when we find this out, we try to cheat the system. We're like, oh, I can control Krishna. Well, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to control Krishna. So let me try to figure out a way that I can actually control Krishna without actually surrendering unto, and we try to skip these steps and just be the controller of Krishna. But that's why we're here in this material world. We're trying to control Krishna here in this material world. So until yeah, go ahead.
Please continue. I don't want to interrupt you.
Oh no, I was just reiterating, until we actually submit to Krishna to the full degree, we can't actually understand that relationship. But go on. That's all I needed to say.
Yeah, I would just say I'm, I'm so excited about these 4 verses because I learned that they are the four most essential verses of the Bhagavatam. I'm just throughout the reading of Bhagavatam, I wish I've come to the understanding, how they're related, to these 4 verses.
It's actually a really great exercise, because sometimes when we're hearing a verse from Shastra out of context, we sometimes start explaining it in ways that we think we see a connection to something, so we start explaining it. But the truth of the matter is, if we're not referring it back to the idea that's covered in these 4 verses, then we're not actually talking about Shastra.
Yeah.
So if we're not actually understanding that everything comes from Krishna, right, and what our relationship is there, as Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita points out, if we're not seeing the Sambandha, Avideya, and Prayojana, that's not what we're talking about, then we're not talking about Shastra, we're talking about something else. So if we read a verse out of context and start talking about like a material thing, so for example, Mataji just brought up charity. So if we start quoting verses on charity and then start using that to try to inspire people to give to hospitals and homeless shelters and things like that without any connection to Krishna, then we're not actually discussing Shastra. We're quoting Shastra, but we're not actually
That's
connected.
true. That's true.
Right. So Srila Prabhupada pointed out that it's okay to feed people and to heal the sick, but if you're not simultaneously giving them Krishna consciousness, then what is the use of feeding them and clothing them and healing them from their disease when the real disease is this polluted consciousness? So that has to be addressed. So sure, yes, you also give them Krishna Prasad, you give them some nice food, you give them a nice place to stay. Yeah, sure, you do that. But you want to encourage them to actually understand. And to whatever extent they're willing to receive that, then, again, we also reciprocate. We as devotees, we're compassionate to all the fallen conditioned souls. But if someone's being belligerent and, they just don't want to, then, we don't have to give them anything, right? We don't have to. We can still do it, but we don't have to. So that's what, in that way, the devotees are generally sometimes known as more compassionate than the Supreme Lord, because sometimes even when people are being belligerent, they'll still say, "Oh no, still you can come." Like Jagai and Madai, Lord Chaitanya was furious, but Lord Nityananda said, "No, let's give them some opportunity." So yeah, so that's there. So unless we're actually seeing the connection, the relationship with Krishna, we're talking about how to apply the knowledge of that relationship to engage in bhakti, or talking about the ultimate goal. Unless we're talking about one of those 3 things or all of them, we are not actually talking about Shastra. That's an important thing to know. So if we come upon a verse and we're kind of stumped to see how to understand it in what context, bring it back to those 3 things. How is it saying that Krishna's, the center, talking about the relationship between us, the infinitesimal spirit soul, and the infinite Supreme Lord, or that relationship, how to act according to that relationship, and how to meet if we can see all of these verses in those contexts, Sambandha, Avideya, and Prayojana, then we are actually understanding Shastra.
Yesterday I heard they say that the second verse is like Sambandha. It represents Sambandha. What about this 3rd verse? What does it represent?
So in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it goes through these verses and it says what they represent. So That's the 25th chapter of Madhya. Okay, it's a pretty big section though, so. And I'd rather answer it with authority from Chaitanya Charitamrita instead of analyzing. So, okay. So verse 118 of 25 Madhya. When one is transcendently situated, he can perceive me. This perception is the basis of one's relationship with the Supreme Lord. So Sambandha is
Call from University of Tea.
second, yeah. Second verse. Then, please process. So Abhideya. Oh, it even says it in the Bengali, 120. Abhideya sadhana bhaktira sundara vichar. So that would be, I think, the fourth verse. Because this, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it goes first verse, second verse, fourth verse, and then third verse. Then, ultimate goal of life, yeah, so this is Prayojana. Third verse, according to Chaitanya Charitamrita. Which is why then the verse after talks about how the highly elevated devotee can bind me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in his heart by love. Wherever he looks, he sees me and nothing else. So that's what's there.
Thank you. Oh, the first one is the second one is Sambandha, the third one is Abhideya,
Manda.
and the third one and the fourth one is Prayojana.
No, first, second, third.
Second, fourth, third. Like that. Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana. And let's see what they say, because the first one, let's see what they say about it.
The first is Sambandha.
And let me go to where we have, okay, this is the first. Okay, that might take me a little long to find. So as far as the first, I'm not sure, but the second is Abhideya, the third is Prayojana, fourth. So tomorrow's will be Abhideya. And
Abhideya is the second one you said, no?
yes, did I say that?
Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana.
Sambandha. Yeah, but here it's, sorry, the second, oh, sorry. The second, I said that wrong. The second verse of Chaturshloki, Bandha, yes. The third, today's verse, Prayojana. The fourth, tomorrow's verse, will be Abhideya. The first, I'm not sure. I'm looking at it right now. Madhya
Second one is what, Prabhu? Second one is what you said again?
Yesterday's verse was Sambandha. Today's verse, Prayojana. Tomorrow's verse, Abhideya, according to Chaitanya Charitamrita. Madhya chapter 25. And the first verse, it's quoted in Madhya 25, 114, 113.
Introduction or something.
But yeah, it's like the introduction. Ahameva Sameva. But yeah, that's, and then it goes, it's great because I don't know if whoever gave class 2 days ago on the first verse got into this, but Chaitanya Charitamrita breaks this verse down. Like in the verse beginning aham eva, the word aham is expressed 3 times. And so it talks about, you know, it really breaks down this verse and gets into it and really explains it completely. But I don't see, I'm kind of skimming it now. I'm not looking very thoroughly. This perception based on, no, so that should also be Sambandha. Looks
So
like
Sambandha twice.
Yeah.
After Prayojana again Sambandha.
Yeah, so it's Sambandha, Prayoja, Prayojana, and then Abhidheya. The way that it looks here. There's
One
also
to Sambandha, then Prayojana, then Abhideya.
yes, Sambandha, Prayojana, Abhidheya. One,
Yeah.
2, 3. There's also a way, so there are also 10 subject matters of Srimad Bhagavatam. So I remember when we were doing this section in Bhakti Vaibhav, we had an assignment. Somehow, I forget what the exact assignment was, but I ended up showing how the 10 subject matters related to these 4 verses also. Because
Wow.
otherwise, you have 4 verses. Where how does that split into 10? But there are the aspects, so you can do like that.
No,
I'd
no,
have
no,
to-
no.
That was a long time ago, but yeah, this section is so interesting. You could, like I said, we literally talk about it for
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
years, but we can do it for lifetimes. But okay, we're way over now. But thank you all. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Evan Chakalpatara Chakrapasandabhya Chapatanam Bhavdebhya Vaishnavibhyo Namo.
Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Thank you,
All right.
Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.